Oh, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so good morning, everyone. And once again, thank you to ATO Studios for the invitation. Of course, today's topic is a very hot topic in the industry. And as you know, we heard in the icebreakers, a lot of interesting points of discussion. What I like to do during these conversations, during these discussions, is to introduce a different perspective that might not be as popular, in these sort of panels. Starting with the panel discussion points for today, which are these 5 topics. What I've identified is there's a couple of foundational points or foundational knowledge that needs to be addressed before you can actually attempt to answer these. And that's what I'm going to try to do in the next 10 to 15 minutes to kind of lay the foundations for being able to actually answer some of these questions. So those points, ANI versus AGI versus ASI, these are terms you might have heard in the news about AI. The second is related to the authorship within architecture. And the third is related to human advancement over time and what that means for different disciplines. And at the end of that, I'll be giving also a very quick demo of AI application that we've built over at my company, Dandem. So firstly, you might have heard the term AGI in the news. If you haven't, you've definitely heard about all the major big tech companies spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the AI space. And the reason they're doing that is because actually currently we're in the most interesting time in the history of AI. And that's because there's currently a race going on where OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, Meta, xAI, Tesla, and pretty much every major tech company is currently in a race to become the first to achieve AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is different to ANI, artificial narrow intelligence. Now, we spoke about a couple of AI applications like Copilot, ChatGPT, Midjourney, Gemini, Nano Banana. These are all applications and examples of ANI, artificial narrow intelligence. And every single AI app or software that you've used up until this point is an example of ANI. It's an AI application or software that does a very specific task very well. The difference between that and AGI is an AI that can do everything that a human can do, right? So it's sort of a replacement for human beings almost. And that is what every major tech company today is working towards. They're all trying to build the first AGI model, which of course, some people predict can happen in the next 2 to 5 years. Others say not in our lifetime. And in the 90s, this was called weak AI versus strong AI. But today, the most important terms to remember are ANI versus AGI. And the reason I put this slide first is because every single question that we ask about AI, the answer depends on whether we're talking about ANI or AGI, because the answers are usually very different. So I do want to have this in context for any conversations that we have later on regarding AI and how it kind of affects our discipline. The second question is related to the authorship. So there's always this sort of hesitancy or cautiousness with AI and whether it's going to take over our creative process or take over what we do as architects, revolutionizing the specification and procurement process. And we have an entire workflow, of course, for that, but I'm going to show you just one very simple example of an AI feature that we built. So I have this, and I think that comes with an assumption that this is the first time architects are partnering with something else in the design process. And that's actually not the case. Of course, in the modernist era, around 100 years ago, there was an approach called tabula rasa, or white paper or blank slate, which basically meant that the architect assumed that the paper or the site that they were building on was a blank slate, which didn't give any information, and all the design data was coming from the architect's mind. And it's sort of one directional, right? From the architect's mind imposed on a piece of paper or imposed on a site context. And this was the modernist approach based on Enlightenment era philosophies like John Locke's white paper and so on. And then in the 1950s and 1960s, we saw an architect, a genius architect called Otto, who introduced a new methodology of design. And what he did basically was, an example of this is in 1961, he had these soap bubble experiments where instead of just having soap bubbles, which take up a spherical shape when they're in the atmosphere, he started putting parameters around it and structures around it. And the soap bubbles, of course, take the shape of the structure that you give it. And they optimize their shape based on the structure that's given to it. And what this did was it gave birth to a new approach to design, where you use the morphogenetic capacity of a material and you partner with the material to actually inform your design process. So you're no more just taking a material for what it is, you're tweaking the parameters and the inputs to actually partner with its capacity to change and deform and adapt to new environments. And that actually becomes your partner as a designer. And then, of course, later on with new computational tools like algorithms and generative design and procedural modeling, we got a whole new school of thought from the 90s onwards. And I've used Patrick Schumacher, of course, as the sort of face of this because, of course, he termed the word parametricism, which I think encapsulate this new style of design. But basically, this took Frey Otto's partnership with materials and added steroids to it and allowed us to do pretty much anything we wanted through simulations with computers involved. So we're partnering with computers in the design process. And basically, this timeline shows that the partnership of the architect with different tools has been evolving over time, right? It's not something new. It's not something that's just starting with AI. AI is just adding a different dimension and a different layer to that evolution over time. So this is also a context I wanted to talk about that we can maybe delve deeper into during the panel discussion. The next thing I want to mention, or the last thing I want to mention, is something related to the discipline itself. So this is, of course, a very beautiful portrait of a Nigerian family. And if we wanted to take this picture, this portrait of the family, in the 1600s versus the 20th century versus the 21st century, that would look like very different things. So, for example, in the 16th century, circa 1525, if we wanted to take a family portrait, what we'd do is we'll call someone called an artist, and they would come over and paint a portrait of the family. 400 years later, in the 20th century, if we wanted to do the same thing, we'd call a different type of profession called a photographer, and they would bring this device called a camera, and they would take a picture of the family. And then today, of course, if you want to do the same thing, we pull out a device from our pocket called an iPhone or a Samsung, and we take a picture instantly. Now, what you notice immediately is two things are happening. One is, even though the function stays the same, the profession responsible for that function changes. So the artist initially was the primary role responsible for capturing reality, right? But of course, devices were created that did that a lot better, faster, quicker, more accurately. And so the artist was no longer needed to capture reality. And of course, then an iPhone or devices were created which could do it better than the profession before it. So the function was changing over time and the professions were changing. But what I wanted to mention here is that even though there were devices and other professions that were created that could do the task of capturing reality better than the artist, the role of the artist did not disappear, right? There are more artists today than there were in the 1600s, even though they're not needed to capture reality. So what happened to art? Well, artists began to do different things. Instead of capturing reality as it is, they began to interpret reality and express themselves in different creative ways. And it gave birth to everything from suprematism to surrealism to pop art to all these different styles of art that were no longer just representing reality, they were interpreting it in different ways. And so basically we saw the function of the artist changing as well as the role responsible for a certain function. The second thing I want to mention here is that you'll see some numbers at the bottom of the slide here, right? Under artists, you have 200 to 300. Under photographer, 3,000 to 4,000. Under iPhone, you have over 1 million. And what these numbers represent actually is the number of human resource or the amount of human resource it takes to achieve each task. So for example, for the artist to actually accomplish painting a portrait, there's pigments that need to be created, canvas, brush makers, framers, and then the artist, of course. And this complete process takes around 200 to 300 people. For the photographer, for the camera, you need camera factories, lens makers, film production, chemicals, logistics, all these different things, which takes around 3,000 to 4,000 people. And for the iPhone, this is, of course, everything from the cobalt mines in Congo all the way to the assembly lines and maybe even the Apple stores that sell the actual iPhone. So there's a long chain of processes that happen, and that's over 1 million people. So what's happened, even though it seems like the iPhone replaced the artist, what actually happened was over 1 million new jobs were created where they could actually do new things with the advancement of society and more work being created. So there's a 5,000x multiple on the number of jobs that were created over time, even though it looks like on a surface level, the artist was replaced. Now, why do I give this whole timeline about pictures and families? The idea is that the same thing or the same anxiety that we're having in architecture, we can use this as an example. When we think technology is going to replace a certain task, there's always more tasks or many more jobs being created with technology. Because with human advancement, what we've seen time and time again is that the more we advance, the more work is needed to actually supply the demand in the industry, right? So that's a very important thing to keep in mind when we discuss AI and whether or not it's replacing architects or it has the capacity to replace architects. Now, the last thing I want to do is I want to show a very quick demo. I know I've spoken very philosophically so far, theoretical, but also, one of my companies is building AI systems, very heavily involved in actually building different AI systems. This is Dandeli, which is an AI startup image here, which is just a very simple sink with a mixer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload this image. So I'm going to drag and drop it, upload it on here. And we have an AI that analyzes it and detects the objects in the image. And it's going to highlight the objects. There we go. So it's highlighted a couple of sinks and the mixer. I'm going to select the sink. And we have two options. We can either do a very simple search, or we can generate a report. So I'm going to generate a report. And right now in the background is doing something called a vector search. So it's searching our marketplace, building different AI systems. This is Dandeli, which is an AI startup revolutionizing the specification and procurement process. And we have an entire workflow, of course, for that. But I'm going to show you just one very simple example of an AI feature that we built. So I have this image here, which is just a very simple sink with a mixer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload this image. So I'm going to drag and drop it, upload it on here. And we have an AI that analyzes it and detects the objects in the image. And it's going to highlight the objects. There we go. So it's highlighted a couple of sinks and the mixer. I'm going to select the sink. And we have two options. We can either do a very simple search, or we can generate a report. So I'm going to generate a report. And right now in the background is doing something called a vector search. So it's searching our marketplace for similar products that look like the sink. And it's also going to create a viability report based on all the data we have in the marketplace and the aesthetics of the image that's input. So whether it's going to be high end based on the materials and the logistics and so on and so forth. So there we go. This is a very simple viability report with some pricing versus similarity graphs and some information as to how viable it is to actually build in the context or the location of the site. And then, of course, you have similar products on the marketplace, which are ready to purchase, or you can add them to the project or whatever the case is, or you can contact the manufacturer. So it's a very simple image search AI feature that we built, and we have many different features. And I do like to balance my talks because I do speak very philosophically about these things. I do like to balance that with actual applications and software we've built, because it's good to kind of have both sides, the theory and the actual technical application of those theories as well. The last thing I want to say before I end the talk is that with all the anxiety that's happening in the industry, one thing is important to keep in mind, and that is that AI won't take your job. A human using AI will. And this is a quote from Jensen Huang, who is the CEO and founder of NVIDIA, the largest company in the world right now. And I think this rings true today and will ring true probably in the next 10 to 20 years. So thank you very much. And I look forward to the discussions with the panel later on and hopefully some questions afterwards as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't need the full length of the question. Just to summarize, I thank you for and then focus on your last slide. Use elastic still.
Thank you for the question. It was a great question. And there's multiple ways that I can answer that, but I think the best thing to keep in mind is the way that you interact with AI. Because I feel like because of a misunderstanding as to what AI is, the way that people interact with it is very different. There's two camps of people. There's one camp that uses AI as a tool. So they treat it like they would treat CAD or BIM or any other technology that has come in the past. And then there's another camp of people that treat AI like a partner or an assistant. And I think the biggest differentiator between who is going to really take advantage of the age of AI that we're currently entering is the second camp of people partnering with AI or treating AI as an assistant. And the reason that is because AI is the first technology ever invented where it can teach you how to use it and
Hello?
it can learn from you about how to get better. This is the first time that's ever happened in technology
Hello?
in history. Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, so I think that's the main point that I want to make is that the big differentiator is treating AI as a partner or an assistant and not just a tool because AI is much more than that, and hopefully we can expound on what that means in the panel. But definitely the main thing is treat AI as a partner or an assistant and not just a tool. Ask it how to learn from it and also teach it curate it, fine tune it to actually be useful for you specifically, whether it's yourself as an individual, or it's your company, or it's your country and your context and your locality, language, whatever the case is. Fine tune it to be useful to you, and don't just take the out of the box.
Does anyone has a question?
Hello, Faisal.
Yes.
Okay, there was two questions online.
Okay.
The first one is, can you explain agentic AI?
Shall we? Okay, so let's start with the first question. Agentic AI
let's start with
is
Go for it.
Agentic AI is basically let's call it a workflow that normally a human being would do. So a bunch of tasks in a series that an AI would do that you automate, or that a human would do that you automate using AI. And I'll give you a very real example that we created actually at Dandeli. So as I mentioned, Dandeli is an AI startup. It's a procurement and specification tool. But we also have a marketplace, which is pretty much like Amazon or like a Jumia, Konga for building materials for construction products. And what happens is that sellers, manufacturers, distributors, they list their products on the marketplace, but we have to do some sort of quality control to make sure that the images are high quality, they represent the actual product, they don't have information about contacts or company information. The application section is correct, the specification section is correct, description is correct, the pricing is accurate depending on the industry standards, and all these different details of each product are basically accurate. And you can imagine if we have thousands of products, it will take a human being quite a long time to do, right? So we created agentic AI systems, essentially AI workflows, which do this for us. So every single day, we have a schedule which turns on. It's called a cron job in technical terms, but basically it's a schedule that turns on this AI system, and it basically wakes up, it checks any products that haven't been verified, it goes through them, it goes through the checklist that we've given it, it reviews this product, and then for each one, it marks it either as approved or flagged or rejected. If it's flagged, it sends it to the team, to our internal team to review manually. If it's approved, it shows on the marketplace. If it's rejected, it's removed from the marketplace and the seller is informed. And then, of course, it gives a breakdown with some advice on how to improve it, some scoring, and so on and so forth. So this is something usually a team member would do, usually a human being would do, but we created an entire workflow for AI to do this. And of course, it's a lot more efficient, it's a lot quicker, it's a lot more accurate. And AI doesn't get tired. So it's happening 24/7 anytime we have it turned on. So this is a very real example of agentic AI, which we've built, which we're currently using. It's active at the moment. And you can do the same thing pretty much for any workflow. You can create agentic AIs and AI workflows for pretty much anything that a human being can do, and AI could do it maybe better. So I hope that answers.
There was no second question, so no worries.
Thanks very much, Faisal.
Sorry, there's another question from the chat. Okay, the question is not from me. It's from E. Banjo. He says, from your experience, where do you see AI applications in the AEC industry next 5 years, especially in African context?
That's a very good question. Honestly, when it comes to like the consumer products, end products, I try to not make predictions because those are usually wrong, right? I can make predictions with the macros. When it comes to specific things, it's usually very inaccurate. But what I can say about this is the reason it's a very, very important question is because what's happening right now, like these discussions we're having about AI, the decisions that affect the result of what we're living in today were made 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, OpenAI was deciding the kind of data to train ChatGPT on. They were deciding how to train it, the models to use, and all that stuff. And today we're living in we're experiencing the results of those decisions. So in the next 5 years, what's going to happen? The decisions for those applications are being made today. And the issue is that one, as architects, and two, as Africans or Nigerians, are not part of those discussions, right? What's happening is there's a very small group of people in the Silicon Valley in California, in the US, that are making all of these decisions that affect pretty much everyone on the planet. And unfortunately, we don't have a say in it. And that's actually one of the main things that motivated me to start an AI startup, so that at least I know that I have some sort of contribution to that process. And I'll actually take this opportunity to explain maybe one or two things about how AI works, just to end off. So with AI, there's layers to AI models. We spoke about, I think in the icebreaker, someone mentioned how Copilot is actually using ChatGPT or GPT. The reason for that is because there's something called the layer one, which is the foundational model, like GPT, for example, by OpenAI, or Gemini, or Meta, or Anthropic. There's different companies that make these foundational models. And then you have applications built on the foundational models. So ChatGPT, Copilot uses GPT, etc. And then there's other layer three applications like Whisperflow, which is like a voice to text app, which uses ChatGPT. So basically you have different layers of AI, and the lower the level, the more foundational it is, the more influential it is, and the more impactful it is, because you control the data and the training. And currently there's not a single, as far as I'm aware anyway, there's not a single layer one company in Nigeria or in Africa. All of it is layer three. Even my company, for example, is layer two. And my goal, for example, is to get to layer one, to get to the level where we're building our own models. We're training it on contextual data, for example, from architects in Nigeria, not just general architects like, ZHA or Foster or whatever. We're training it on actual data that's going to impact the people. Same as, let's say, indigenous architecture, by the people. I think that's super important, and that's sort of the project that anyone interested in AI should be going in, right? It's going to be a collaborative effort, of course. It's going to take a whole industry to do. It's going to take a lot of different parties involved. But I would say that that's where we should be looking at in terms of how it's going to impact the industry, especially in the African context.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Are you ready for your...
Oh, okay. I do have a question that I've written down. Let me get that up.
Right.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
So the question is, it's a very simple one. Hopefully, people would be able to figure it out. But the question is, which came first, AI image recognition or AI image generation? So which came first, image recognition or image generation?
Image recognition. Faisal, we have to answer. What's the answer?
You want the answer? Okay, so it's sorry, I thought we're gonna leave it for people. So it's image recognition.